Today we have some more actual history from the American West in the late 1800s. We will be reading about some wars that arose between the Piute Indians when the white settlers began arriving in large numbers during the 1850s. We will also hear about a war between the Paiute Indians and another tribe of red-haired cannibalistic Indians that occurred in the 15 or 1600s. We will be reading from this book, Life Among the Piutes, Their Wrongs and Claims, by Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins. This book was published all the way back in 1883. Sarah Winnemucca was a member of the Northern Piute tribe. She was born near Lake Humboldt in northern Nevada in 1844. Her people were initially peaceful toward the white settlers. Sarah's grandfather was Chief Truckee. He had befriended John Fremont in his 1843 expedition, and he was very friendly toward the white settlers. He assisted the U.S. Army in the Spanish-American War. This story begins in 1858, when Chief Truckee had sent his granddaughter Sarah Winnemucca to live with Major William Ormsby, who led the militia of settlers near Carson City, Nevada. The author Sarah Winnemucca was about 14 years old at the time. She tells of the peace that lasted for a couple of years between her tribe and the white settlers, but then she tells of the breakout of war. She also tells the legend of the Paiutes' war with the red-haired Indians, who were cannibals. I will now stop writing about myself and family and tribe customs, and tell about the wars and the causes of the wars. I will jump over about 6 years. My sister and I were living at this time in Genoa with Major Ormsby's family, who took us as playmates for their little girl. While with them, we learned the English language very fast, for they were very kind to us. This was in the year 1858, I think. I am not sure. In that year, our white brothers had their houses all along Carson River. There were 21 houses there in our country. I know all the names of the people that lived in them. One man who was on the upper part of Carson River was Mr. Olds. The next man by the name of Palmer had a family. The third one by the name of Job also had a family. Another family was named Walters. Another man whose name was Dr. Daggett had no family, nor had the next one whose name was Van Sickle. The next one had more than one family. He had 2 wives and his name was Thornton. The man who lived in the next house had still more wives. There were 2 brothers, one had 3 wives, and the other 5. Their name was Roos. The next man was named Knott, and had no family. The next house had 3 brothers named Sides, with no families. The next man was named Gilbert, and had no family. The next was named Aldridge, and had a family. Then came our friend, Major Ormsby. Next came Adams and brothers, who had no wives. Then Jones and family, Miller and family, Brown with no family, Elsie with no family, Mr. Ellis and family, Williams brothers no family, Mr. Cole and family, Mr. Black and family at Humboldt Lake. All these white people were loved by my people. We lived there together and were as happy as could be. There was no stealing, no one lost their cattle or horses. My people had not learned to steal. We lived that way in peace for another year. Our white brothers gave my people guns for their horses in the way of trading. Yet my people never said, "We want you to give us something for our land." Now there were a great many of our white brothers everywhere through our country, and mines or farms here and there. The Mormons came in a great many wagons and settled down in Carson Valley, where now stands the great Carson City, as it is called. The following year, 1859, we were yet living with Major Ormsby, and Mother and Father were down at Pyramid Lake with all our people, so Sister and I were all alone there with our dear good friend, Major Ormsby. Late that fall, there happened to be a very sad thing indeed. A white man who was dearly beloved by my people started for California to get provisions for the winter, as they all did every winter. Mr. McMullen took a great deal of money to lay in large supplies, for they had a store about 30 miles down Carson River. 2 of them, McWilliams and McMullen, went off the same night, and camped in the mountains. Someone came in the night and killed them both, and after they had shot them with guns or pistols, they placed arrows in the wounds, to make it appear as if Indians had killed them. The next day, news came in that Indians had killed John McMullen. They were asked how they knew that Indians had killed him, and they answered, "We know because it was done with arrows." The same afternoon, 30 men went to get the dead bodies of the 2 men. They brought them in and the arrows too. Of course, everybody said it was the Indians that killed them. My brother Natchez and our cousin, who was called young Winnemucca, and 100 others were sent for. In 2 days' time they came. My brother was then peace chief. Major Ormsby asked if we knew what tribe of Indians those arrows belonged to. My cousin told his white brothers the arrows belonged to the Washoes. So our good friend Major Ormsby said to my brother, "Will you help us get the Washoe chief to come in and give up the men who killed the 2 white men?" My brothers said that they would help find the men that killed poor John McMullen. So that evening my people had what they called a war dance, the first one I had ever seen. A great many white men and women came to see them, and Lizzie Ormsby kept saying, "Where is Natchez? He was dressed up so we did not know him." The white people stayed until it was all over, and when it was all over, the major called his men and said, "We will sing the Star-Spangled Banner." It was not a bit like the way my grandfather used to sing it, and that was the first time I had heard it sung by the white people. My cousin was the war chief. He sent 5 men to bring in the Washoe chief. The next morning they came in with about 10 Washoes. As soon as they came in, the white men gathered round them. Major Ormsby showed the arrows, and asked them if they knew them. The Washoe chief, who is called Jam, said, "You ask me if these are my people's arrows. I say yes." Major Ormsby said, "That is enough." He said to my brother Natchez, "Tell Captain Jam that his people have killed 2 men, and he must bring the men and all the money, and they shall not be hurt, and all will be right." The Washoe chief said, "I know my people have not killed the men, because none of my men have been away. We were all at Pine Nut Valley, and I do not know what to think of the sad thing that has happened." "And here are your arrows, and you cannot say anything?" said my cousin, the war chief. "We will give you 10 days to bring the men who killed our 2 white brothers, and if you do not, we shall have to fight you, for they have been so kind to us all. Who could have the heart to kill them? Now go and bring in the men." Poor, poor Washoes, they went away with very sad hearts. After they left, brother talked with all his men, and asked them what they thought about it. They all said it was very strange indeed. Time would tell whether they killed them or not. 6 days after, the Washoe chief came in with 3 prisoners. One of the prisoners had a wife, the other 2 had none, but their mothers came with them. The white men gathered around and put handcuffs on them to lock them up in a small house for the night. Next morning all the white people came to see them. Some said, "Hang the devils right off!" And the white boys threw stones at them and used the most shameful language to them. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon came 31 white men, all with guns on their shoulders, and as they marched along, my brother and cousin ran to meet them. One Washoe woman began to scream, "Oh, they have come to kill them!" How they did cry! One could hear the poor things miles away. My brother went to them and told them not to cry. "Oh, dear chieftain, they did not kill the white men. Indeed, they did not. They have not been away from our camp for over a month. None of our men were away, and our chief has given these 3 young men because they have no fathers." One of the young girls said, "You who are the mighty chieftain, save my poor brother, for he is all mother and I have to hunt for us. Oh, believe us, he is as innocent as you are. Oh, tell your white brothers that what we tell you is true as the sun rises and sets." And one woman ran to my cousin, the war chief, and threw herself down at his feet and cried out, "Oh, you are going to have my poor husband killed. We were married this winter, and I have been with him constantly since we were married. Oh, good spirit, come. Oh, come into the hearts of this people. Oh, whisper in their hearts that they may not kill my poor husband. Oh, good chief, talk for him. Our cruel chief has given my husband to you because he is afraid that all of us will be killed by you." And she raised up her head and said to the Washoe chief, "You have given my innocent blood to save your people." Then my brother said to the Washoes, "These white men have come to take the 3 Washoe men who killed John McMullen and McWilliams to California, to put them in jail." Just then one of the women cried out, "Look there, they have taken them out. See, they are taking them away." We were all looking after them, and before brother got near them, the 3 prisoners broke and ran. Of course they were shot. 2 were wounded, and the 3rd ran back with his hands up, but all of them died. Oh, such a scene I never thought I should see. At daybreak all the Washoes ran to where they were killed. The wife of the young man threw herself down on his dead body. Such weeping was enough to make the very mountains weep to see them. They would take the dead bodies into their arms, and they were all bloody themselves. I ran to Mrs. Ormsby crying. I thought my poor heart would break. I said to her, I believe those Washoe women. They say their men are all innocent. They say they were not away from their camp for a long time. And how could they have been the men that killed the white men? I told her all that I had heard the women say, and I said that I believed them. Mrs. Ormsby said, How came the Washoe arrows there? And the chief himself has brought them to us, and my husband knows what he is doing. I ran back to see what they were going to do to the dead bodies, as I had heard my people say that the Washoes were like the Digger Indians, who burn their dead. When I got there, the Washoe chief was talking to my brother. I did not know what he said before I came, but I know from what I heard he had been making a confession. He said, pointing down to the men who were innocently killed, It is true what the women say. It is I who have killed them. Their blood is on my hands. I know their spirits will haunt me, and give me bad luck while I live. This was what the Washoe chief said to my brother. The one that was wounded also died, and the sister and the mother it was dreadful to see. The mother cried out, Oh, may the good spirit send the same curse upon you. You may all live to see the day when you will suffer at the hands of your white brothers, as you call them. She said to her girl, My child, you have no brother now, no one to love you, no one to come with game and say, Here, sister, here is game for you. You are left all alone. Oh, my sweet son, gone, gone! This was the first trouble the poor Washoes had with white people, and the only one they ever did have with them. So the day passed away, and the 2 dead Washoes were taken away, and their bodies were burned. That is their custom. The other was taken to California. My poor little sister made herself sick, she cried so much that day. 2 days afterwards, Major Ormsby sent his men home. So he did my cousin, who is called young Winnemucca. And brother stayed longer for us, because he had been with Major Ormsby for a long time, and we could talk very well. My poor little sister was so very sick, it was 2 weeks before we could go to our mother. When we got home, it was winter. There was so much snow that we stayed in the mountains where now stands the great city called Virginia City. It was then our Pine Nut Mountains. Sometime during the winter, the Washoe chief came and told us that the white men who killed McMullen and McWilliams were caught. My brother Natchez said, Oh, have they been caught? Yes, that is what Major Ormsby said. So did all the others. The Washoe chief went on and said, I have come to ask you to pay me for the loss of the 2 men. The white men have brought back the other men, and they say they have hung 2 men. My brother told the Washoe chief that his people had nothing to do with what the white people had done. It is you who ought to pay the poor mother and sister and wife of your own tribe, because you gave them up yourself. Therefore you must not blame us. We only did our duty, and we all know that the white men did nothing to us, and we did no more than they would do for us. Next day my brother went to see for himself. He gave the Washoe chief a horse to go with him, for the poor Washoes had never owned a horse in their lives. 10 men went with my brother. The War of 1860 began in this way. 2 little girls about 12 years old went out in the woods to dig roots, and did not come back, and so their parents went in search for them, and not finding them, all my people who were there came to their help, and very thoroughly searched, and found trails which led up to the house of 2 traders, named Williams on Carson River, near by the Indian camp. But these men said they had not seen the children, and told my people to come into the house and search it, and this they did, as they thought thoroughly. After a few days they sorrowfully gave up all search, and their relations had nearly given them up for dead, when one morning an Indian rode up to the cabin of the Williamses. In those days the settlers did not hesitate to sell us guns and ammunition whenever we could buy, so these brothers proposed to buy the Indian's horse as he rode up. They offered him a gun, 5 cans of powder, 5 boxes of caps, 5 bars of lead, and after some talk the trade was made. The men took the horse, put him in the stable, and closed the door, and went into the house to give him the gun, etc. They gave him the gun, powder, and caps, but would not give him the lead. And because he would not take a part, he gave back what he had taken from them, and went out to the barn to take his horse. Then they set their dog upon him. When bitten by the dog, he began howling, and to his surprise he heard children's voices answer him, and he knew at once it was the lost children. He made for his camp as fast as he could, and told what had happened, and what he had heard. Brother Natchez and others went straight to the cabin of the Williams brothers. The father demanded the children. They denied having them, and after talking quite a while denied it again, when all at once the brother of the children knocked one of the Williamses down with his gun, and raised his gun to strike the other. But before he could do so, one of the Williams brothers stooped down and raised a trap door, on which he had been standing. This was a surprise to my people, who had never seen anything of the kind. The father first peeped down, but could see nothing. Then he went down and found his children lying on a little bed, with their mouths tied up with rags. He tore the rags away and brought them up. When my people saw their condition, they at once killed both brothers and set fire to the house. 3 days after, the news was spread as usual. The bloodthirsty savages had murdered 2 innocent, hard-working, industrious, kind-hearted settlers. And word was sent to California for some army soldiers to demand the murderers of the Williamses. As no army soldiers were there just then, Major Ormsby collected 160 volunteers, and came up, and without asking or listening to any explanation, demanded the men. But my people would not give them up, and when the volunteers fired on my people, they flew to arms to defend the father and brother, as any human beings would do in such a case, and ought to do. And so the war began. It lasted about 3 months, and after a few precious ones of my people, and at least 100 white men had been killed, amongst them our dear friend Major Ormsby, who had been so hasty, a peace was made. My brother had tried to save Major Ormsby's life. He met him in the fight, and as he was ahead of the other Indians, Major Ormsby threw down his arms, and implored him not to kill him. There was not a moment to be lost. My brother said, "Drop down as if dead when I shoot, and I will fire over you." But in the hurry and agitation he still stood pleading, and was killed by another man's shot. Some other friends of my brother, Judge Broomfield and servants, and a Spaniard lived in a small cabin about 12 miles off. They were not fighting against us, and my brother defended their lives, and risked his own. He stood at their cabin door and beat back the assailants with a club, and succeeded in driving them off. But my uncle and cousins were so angry with him for saving white men's lives that they whipped him with a horsewhip. We all knew my uncle loved us. He was always kind to us, but I never could love him again as I had done after he whipped my brother. My noble, patient brother, who bore his uncle no ill will, but was satisfied that he had saved the lives of his friends. Brave deeds don't always get rewarded in this world. There was another occasion when my brother saved the life of his friend, Mr. Seth Cook of San Francisco, and of 6 others, but as I do not remember all the particulars, I will not attempt to relate it. Mr. Cook had often given my brother valuable assistance, and he is still living, and can tell the story of his escape from death himself. The regular troops at last reached the grounds, and after fighting a little while raised a flag of truce, which was responded to by my brother, and peace was made, and a treaty giving the Pyramid Lake Reservation to my people. I have no way of telling any of the particulars. The reservation was given to us in 1860, and we were to get large supplies as long as we were peaceful. But though there were 13 agents there in the course of 23 years, I never knew of any issue after that first year. Among the traditions of our people is one of a small tribe of barbarians who used to live along the Humboldt River. It was many hundred years ago. They used to waylay my people and kill and eat them. They would dig large holes in our trails at night, and if any of our people traveled at night, which they did, for they were afraid of these barbarous people, they would oftentimes fall into these holes. That tribe would even eat their own dead. Yes, they would even come and dig up our dead after they were buried, and would carry them off and eat them. Now and then they would come and make war on my people. They would fight, and as fast as they killed one another on either side, the women would carry off those who were killed. My people say they were very brave. When they were fighting, they would jump up in the air after the arrows that went over their heads, and shoot the same arrows back again. My people took some of them into their families, but they could not make them like themselves, so at last they made war on them. This war lasted a long time. Their number was about 2,600. The war lasted some 3 years. My people killed them in great numbers, and what few were left went into the thick bush. My people set the bush on fire. This was right above Humboldt Lake. Then they went to work and made tule or bulrush boats, and went into Humboldt Lake. They could not live there very long without fire. They were nearly starving. My people were watching them all around the lake, and would kill them as fast as they could come on land. At last, one night they all landed on the east side of the lake, and went into a cave near the mountains. It was a most horrible place, for my people watched at the mouth of the cave, and would kill them as they came out to get water. My people would ask them if they would be like us and not eat people like coyotes or beasts. They talked the same language but would not give up. At last my people were tired, and they went to work and gathered wood, and began to fill up the mouth of the cave. Then the poor fools began to pull the wood inside till the cave was full. At last my people set it on fire. At the same time they cried out to them, "Will you give up and be like men, and not eat people like beasts? Say quick, we will put out the fire." No answer came from them. My people said they thought the cave must be very deep or far into the mountain. They had never seen the cave nor known it was there until then. They called out to them as loud as they could, "Will you give up? Say so, or you will all die." But no answer came. Then they all left the place. In 10 days some went back to see if the fire had gone out. They went back to my 3rd or 5th great-grandfather, and told him that they must all be dead. There was such a horrible smell. This tribe was called People Eaters, and after my people had killed them all, the people round us called us Sedu Kara. It means conqueror. It also means enemy. I do not know how we came by the name of Piutes. It is not an Indian word. I think it is misinterpreted. Sometimes we are called pine nut eaters, for we are the only tribe that lives in the country where pine nuts grow. My people say that the tribe we exterminated had reddish hair. I have some of their hair, which has been handed down from father to son. I have a dress which has been in our family a great many years, trimmed with this reddish hair. I am going to wear it sometime when I lecture. It is called the mourning dress, and no one has such a dress but my family. So that's it for this story from Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins' book, Life of the Piutes, Their Wrongs and Their Claims. This book provides an interesting perspective on life among the western frontier as settlers were arriving from the east. The story about the red-haired Indians who died in the cave has received some support from archaeological records after it was discovered by a company that was harvesting guano from the cave. I will now read some accounts of the discovery of the cave from the 1929 book, Lovelock Cave by Llewellyn L. Loud and M.R. Harrington. John T. Reed, a mining engineer in Lovelock, Nevada, gives the following history of Lovelock Cave. Reed's father ran a general merchandise store at Lovelock from 1883 to 1895, in which the son worked as a clerk. Through this work, he came into contact with all of the Indians of that region, old and young. I recall that along about 1887, when I was about 16 years old, Captain Natchez, 2 other Indians, one known locally as Coffee Charlie, the other as Mustache Charlie, and myself had undertaken to catch some wild horses that roamed in the neighborhood of the Carson and Humboldt sinks. In due time we came into contact with the wild horses, and then the chase was on. After running those horses all day long, we were obliged to camp overnight near the southern end of the Humboldt Sink, and on its eastern shore. The next morning we resumed the chase, following the horses over into Carson Sink Desert. But here we had to turn around, homeward bound, since we had no fresh saddle horses available to pursue the mustangs further. On the way back we passed Lovelock Cave, and the hour being late we decided to camp there for the night. Later Captain Natchez related to me the great calamity which had occurred in that cave to another race of people, who had been exterminated by the Piutes. In the tale that Natchez related, with the other two Indians aiding him in bringing out all the material facts that had any connection, I was informed that about 4 or 5 generations back, the Indians had fought to extermination a people who were red-headed and spoke their own language. The fact that these two people spoke the same language suggests that they had lived together for a long period of time. Natchez assigned no reason for the origin of the trouble between the two races, and I doubt if he knew or had a history, although his sister, Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, states that these people were cannibals and ate the Piutes. This is hardly compatible with her further statement that the Piutes had taken some of these people into their own families. Annie Lowry, a half-Indian who married an Indian named Mr. Sandy, assigned as a reason for the trouble between the two races that these people had stolen their women and taken their wild rice seed away from them. I rather think that the matter of food was the trouble, and the Piutes decided after a period of droughts that they would exterminate the other people who were consumers of the small amounts that was all the while getting smaller and smaller of food that was available in the form of wild seeds and wild fowl that visited the lakes. Natchez stated that these people had come from the southwest. A battle had waged for a long time on the Carson Sink, at some sandhills on the east and west side of the Carson River, after which the Piutes had driven these people northward into the region of the Humboldt Lake, thence across the lake to the cave, some going into the cave while others went northward. From what I learned through Natchez and from numerous others of the old Indians, I have deduced that this red-headed people had long occupied the territory about the cave, before the Paiute Indians had come from elsewhere. Natchez further related how the Paiute Indians had gathered sagebrush in great quantity around and about the hills adjacent to the cave, and assembled it on the bluff above the cave. Then they had lit it and thrown it down immediately in front of the cave. The Piutes stayed on either side of the cave at a safe distance, and watched for the people within to come out for food or water, or to escape the smoke which in part penetrated the cave. As they came out, they were dispatched with well-directed arrows. The following account was obtained by Mr. John T. Reed from James H. Hart in regard to the first excavation of Lovelock Cave. In 1911, I heard David Pugh of Lovelock tell of an old Indian cave some 20 miles south of Lovelock. He said that it was full of bat guano in which he had dug down 4 feet. When a boy, he had learnt from the Indians where the cave was. There had been fires in it, for there was much smoke on the walls. Realizing that if the cave was as large as described, the guano might be of value, I arranged with Piute to file a mineral location upon it, and ship out the guano. This we did, working from the fall of 1911 to the spring of 1912. We drove a small tunnel into the mouth of the cave, or rather to one side of it, the natural opening being too small to work through. We took out about 5 carloads of guano, which were shipped to the Hawaiian Fertilizer Company of San Francisco. We soon began to discover Indian relics and notified Dr. J.C. Merriam of the University of California, who took the matter up with the University of Nevada and the Nevada Historical Society. We also wrote to the Smithsonian Institution, but they advised that they had no funds for collecting, receiving only donations. After some of the best specimens had been destroyed, we received word from the State Historical Society that, in conjunction with the University of California, they would send an investigator. This was Mr. Loud. We gave him all possible facilities for collecting. Many objects had been destroyed by the weather and others had been taken away. I recall many boas or ropes of fine feathers. As these lay strewn about in the open end of the cave in the way of the workmen, they were irreparably damaged. Some of these boas were found perfectly preserved. All the Indian objects began to appear about 4 feet below the surface of the guano. In the south end of the cave, about 20 feet deep, we unearthed some skeletons. In the north-central part of the cave, about 4 feet deep, was a striking-looking body of a man, 6 feet 6 inches tall. His body was mummified and his hair distinctly red. There was a grass rope about his neck with a knot under the left ear. The rope was about 8 feet long. The feet were bound together from the ankle to above the knees with stout rope. The mummification was complete except for a part of the abdomen. The other mummies all had red hair. I think there were either 4 or 5. Those that appeared to be women were small, something like a Japanese woman in height. This was not altogether due to the shrinking of the bodies and mummifying, because the man was a giant. The women had on moccasins which reached clear to the knees. The buckskin was beaded with shells. 2 of them had on a kind of buckskin coat or gown that came down to the knees. These bodies were from the deep south end of the cave. There were no bats in the cave when we went there to work. Besides David Pugh, there worked in the cave Samuel Pugh, Hanson, Cummings, and perhaps 1 or 2 others. We screened the guano through a 3/4 inch mesh, discarding everything that did not go through the screen. Probably all objects that passed through the mesh were shipped away with the guano. After we got through working the cave, one George Stotts worked on what was left in the cave for a while. He probably shipped out about a carload of guano. So that's it for this episode about the Piute Indians of northern Nevada. This was told from the perspective of Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, who wrote this book back in 1883. She would die just 8 years later in 1891. This story told of the breakout of the Pyramid Lake War. Williams Station was a stop on the Pony Express route, and there were 3 other men killed at the station, along with the 2 Williams brothers. These men were visiting the station's saloon. The 3rd Williams brother, James O. Williams, was not there at the time of the attack, and he returned to find his brothers and the 3 patrons dead. So the Pyramid Lake War began after someone at the Williams Station kidnapped and mistreated the 2 Paiute girls. We will probably do some other episodes about the history of Nevada during this time. Most of the white settlers who fought the Piutes, along with Major Ormsby, had no military background and were not well trained. Consequently, most of them died in the same battle where Major Ormsby was killed. This is another episode where there is mention of Indians with red hair. However, it took place hundreds of years before Sarah Winnemucca wrote her book. So these Indians were probably not simply white outlaws who had joined a tribe and lived like Indians. It's possible that they were somehow descended from Vikings who visited America hundreds of years before English settlement began, or that they are related to an Asian group like the Ainu of Japan, who have been known to have blonde or red hair. Some archaeologists have also speculated that the preserved red hair is due to rust or another chemical process, and that these Indians did not really have red hair. Feel free to leave a comment about what you think. This channel is called Unworthy History because we cover actual history that has been cast aside and deemed unworthy to show or talk about on history channels on TV. Those channels have abandoned their mission of presenting actual historical documentaries. So here on this channel, we keep our worthy history alive by reading directly from old books. If you'd like to join our mission here on Unworthy History, then consider becoming a Patreon or YouTube channel member. Your contribution will be recognized at the end of each episode, and you will also have access to our members-only videos that we occasionally release. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.